Okay, so here we are at the Rialto. It's probably the most famous part of Venice, apart from St. Mark's, and everybody comes here. In fact, at various parts of the day, you can hardly cross the bridge from all the people who are crowded there taking the selfies, wanting to look at the Grand Canal, and mostly wanting other people to see that they're at the Grand Canal wherever they are in the world. And I've come here to talk about the foundations of Venice. So I think it's something remarkable, like 90% of the people who come to Venice look at something like 10% or less of Venice itself. And I'm here to talk about the people of Venice and those back streets that you might not know about, which tell us about the origins of Venice, the people who lived here, and what made this city so special. So if we look here at the Rialto itself, one of the things that maybe tourists don't look at are these two statues on either side of the spandrels of the bridge. I should say this bridge was put up in 1599 by Antonio da Ponte. I wonder sometimes whether he got the job because of his name, meaning of the bridge. And what people don't see, perhaps, is the Annunciation scene. So on my left-hand side of the bridge, you see Gabriel, because of the wings, and there he is pointing and aiming at Our Lady there, who with her very sort of animated gesture is receiving the power of the Holy Spirit. And then you ask yourself, what is the Annunciation doing on the Rialto? And that's because Venice was founded, according to legend, in 421 on the 25th of March, which is the feast day of the Annunciation of Our Lady. And so I want to look at what this foundation is all about. So here we are looking at the Fondaco dei Tedeschi. It's an interesting word, Fondaco. We don't really know where it comes from, but it could come from the Arabic word funduk, which is a kind of a warehouse. And if you look at this magnificent building, which stems from the beginning of the 16th century, from about 1509, you can see just how much wealth was poured into making this. It's the warehouse and it's the place where the German merchants lived. And by German, we don't mean just German, we mean Bohemian, Eastern European, anything actually Northern European, even the Swiss and the Belgians. So we have an idea of something like 200 people living here. And you can see from that blue sort of dock there, that's the Watergate where a lot of the goods came in. And they unloaded on this bottom floor here, which is a kind of a warehouse for all the goods coming from Germany, coming from Northern Europe. And what sort of stuffs are they? They're not only the obvious ones, so wood and pelt and fur, but also precious metals, gold and silver. And inside there, the people aren't just storing things, but if you look in the top floors there, they're living there, they're also working there. This is where the first printing press came into. As a man called Speyer in 1469. You can imagine him working on top of it. But there's metallurgy, there's printing, there's making of various leather goods all up there, when people are also living there and unloading their goods here. What I find interesting is if you look at this magnificent building, which I should say, you need to be seeing the frescoes, which are no longer there, made by Giorgione and his sidekick, Titian. We have only just a little remnant of it in the Cadoro. So you need to be imagining all of this. Do you know what I find super interesting is you didn't have to live here if you were German or from Northern Europe. You didn't have to. But you did have to let people know where you were living. And it's what's really interesting is they're worried. There's a lot of Germans. There's about 5,000 Germans in the beginning of the 16th century who are living here. 5,000. And they're worried, particularly in the latter part of the 16th century, about Protestantism coming into Venice. And so the Venetians are protecting themselves, from the danger of foreign practices coming into here. Venice has this really interesting relationship with foreigners. They need them. They need foreigners to be, trading here. They're also worried about them. They're worried about them infecting, what is Venice. And I think seeing the same thing here today in Venice. Venice needs the tourists. Venice needs the various people coming from all over the world to help it out, sell things and to help out with service industries. But on the other hand, they have a really ambivalent relationship with them as well. And on the other side of the Rialto here, we can see a very different kind of building. This is Palazzo of the Camerlenghi. Camerlenghi, the finance ministers. They're the ones who are here. This is the voice of the state. So just in case you think Venice is awash with foreigners and they're just letting them go free, it's far from the case. Venice is incredibly involved in all of the trade on a state level. So these finance ministers are determining, what should be traded, how much should be taxed. They're responsible for everything that's coming in and everything that's going out of Venice, how much customs are being paid. They're also responsible for making sure that the debtors pay their debt. So if you look there, just past this gondola here, you can imagine those people to where it says Fondamenta della Prison, which is in Venetian, of course, not in Italian. You need to be imagining people who are there enclosed because they haven't paid their debts to the state. But actually, the reason why they came here is it's the deepest part of the canal. The Buzignacus, it was called, the canal. But this is the artery of Venice. This is one canal in Venice. A lot of people talk about the many canals in Venice, and they don't know that there's only one canal. There's lots of lots of little waterways, but there's not lots of canals. There's only this one here. And it's amazing. This is where all the great and the good showed off their palazzi, showed off their wealth. In fact, a lot of the elites on the bottom floor of their palazzi had warehouses because they were all traders, very different to their model, the Roman model. So Venetians prided themselves on being inheritors, the heirs of the Roman Republic. Roman senators were not allowed to take part in trade. They thought it was dirty, and they weren't allowed by law. They did, of course, buy slaves, but they weren't supposed to. Venetians, not so much. They were all traders, and they made piles of money on trade. And the Rialto, this is the symbol of that. It's true. It's where they first come, in this part of Venice, and this is where they make so much of their money here, the trade, so much of their money here in the Rialto area. So we're going to head now towards the market itself. Today it's a holiday, actually, so we're not going to see many traders today. Still alive and well, the Venetian Ghetto, the market that is. They used to be the market of the world, where east meets west, where north met south. This is Venice, the center of the universe as far as trade goes. So we're just going to walk down now. So here we are at a church called the Giacometto. It's the Church of San Giacomo, St. James. And if you look at that area by the door where you can see Venezia 421 to 2021, that is the date that Venice gives itself as the foundation of the city. And I would say, as someone who was raised in Vicenza, this is a city which has ancient roots. 421, this is AD, is embarrassingly late. And it's also not even vaguely true. But this is their foundation story. Their foundation story is that there were Padovani who came in, people from Padua, and they came in to settle this area, and that they erected this church. According to their legends, we know it's not true. In fact, I think we only have references of this church from the 11th century, which is really late for Venice itself. But I think what's interesting about it is the foundation stories. So what is this foundation story? So in actuality, in 452, Attila the Hun came ravaging this area, and people from all over the coastline, from Treviso, from Padova, from Aquileia, from Alpino, they came into the lagoon, hiding really, looking for ways of making money, but also really ways to hide. This is the first part they settle in these 118 islands, which we call Venice itself, that central part of Venice. And You put these people here, the Padovani, Trevigiani, the people from Aquileia who speak a strange Italian, all together in the same area, they're not going to get along. You know, you put a Vicentino next to Veronese in the neighboring island, that's going to cause chaos. So in the very foundation of Venice, we have people coming from all over and trying to get along. It's in the very foundation that Venice is made up of foreigners. And if you won't understand Venice unless you understand that. I'm going to show you something really funny. These columns here, these little columns, are Roman spolia. In other words, they come from a Roman building. And this is typical of Venice, actually, to reuse ancient things and to pass them off at your own. And if you look just right here in one of these reused columns, you see the shape of a fish. And then you see above it is this little, like a square or rectangular thing. And originally, those denoted the minimum size of a fish and the minimum size of an oyster that you could sell because they're looking after their fish stock and they want to make sure that they don't take them too young. And here it is, here in this church of San Giacomo. And in there is a message, isn't there? Somewhere in there, that implication that the trade of Venice, the foundation of Venice, the very essence of Venice is also bound up in the church. Venice is foreign. Venice is made up of foreigners, and the safety, the good luck, the well-being of Venice is all wrapped up in the church. We're looking at something which is really special, just right opposite the Palazzo dei Camerlenghi. If you look up here, you see Sottoportico. And again, I can't stress enough how much this is not Italian, but it's Venetian, so it would be Sottoportico in Italian. But it's one T, Sottoportico in Venetian, and it just means this arcaded area. And it's, what is it? It's a Sottoportico, this arcade area of the Banco Giro. And what is the Banco Giro? It's a state-run bank. So in the 16th century, with the collapse of a lot of private banks, the Camerlenghi and the finance ministers decide actually that Venice needs to have a good line of credit and that it can't rely on people going bust. They literally come in and they stump up the cash, and they're the ones who are offering the loans to traders going all over the Mediterranean, bringing in fruits, bringing in silks, bringing in spices, of course. Giving the loans, and they're also putting people right into prison if they don't pay the loans. This is one of the first state-run banks in the world. Venice knows that if it's going to continue to be Venice, if it's going to continue to have all this trade coming in, then it needs to have liquidity, and it needs to make sure that liquidity is stable. And that's what this is here. Today, of course, it's a whole series of bars and cafes, because that's what brings in the money now. This is really fun. It's a little bit beside the story of the foundation of Venice, but it says something a lot about Venice. There's a couple things that are funny. This area here, this is called the complex or the complex of the Gobbo di Venezia, and here is the Gobbo di Venezia. Gobbo means hunchback in Italian. Here he is, poor chap. This is a statue made in 1571. And he's holding up, this is by a man called Pietro di Saron. He's holding up these stairs here. And you can imagining that you'd have a speaker walk up here, and you climb up here to get onto that. And it's a really good story here. First of all, what this is a bit of spolia from acre, actually. Venetians do this a lot. When they're not trading, they're nicking, they're stealing. Pinching, what's the good word? All of that. What their use is this is where a speaker would come and stand on there, so imagine him there, and talk about the laws of the city, the new laws that have just been promulgated in the city, whatever they are. What's really funny is that also there's a mirroring one right on the side of St. Mark's. It's the same sort of stubby column that's there. And what you need to do is you need to walk from that stubby column there to here. You need to walk when you've been caught nicking something yourself. If you're a robber, if you've done something which is illegal but on a low enough level that you don't need to be sent to prison, you have to walk from St. Mark's to here, being flagellated the whole time while wearing exactly nothing. A walk of shame is all I can think. And they used to come over here when they finally reached the end of this very shameful walk and kiss the hunchback, the gobbo here. It's another good story about the gobbo here. He's one of the iconic people in Venice. He's a talking statue, and I love the whole concept. It's a 16th century concept. I think it starts out in Venice here or in Rome. So on the side of the Piazza Navona in Rome, there's a really famous statue. It's an ancient statue. He's called Pasquino. He's been given that name, and Pasquino's famous still today for being the place where people leave comments written in Roman complaining about always the Pope and the state, always those two people. That's Pasquino in Rome. So he's a talking statue, talking in the sense that people are able to vent their many complaints about the church and the state there, leaving little notes. What's funny is the connection that Pasquino has to the Gobbo. They talk to each other. Venetians used to complain about the state and the church also, but in Venetian, totally different dialect. They wouldn't understand each other. So these are talking statues. The Gobbo di Venezia. Everybody comes to the Rialto. 99% of people who come to Venice go to the Rialto. Who comes here? I think not many. And who knows the story? Not many. People just tend to walk right past this little bit of history. It's a little bit of fun bit of history, too. So we're here in the market in the Rialto area, and I'm here with my old friend, Stefano Martin, and actually, you call yourself Steve Martin.
Steve Martin, right?
Yes, because your name is actually Steve Martin.
Steve Martin, exactly.
And Stefano, se parlo in italiano meglio?
Sì, grazie.
So I thought I would have a little, just introduce, he's a bit legendary in these parts, not just because he's called Steve Martin, because he's one of the last Venetian traders here. In fact, Stefano's parents were also traders, whereas here today, actually, Stefano has his own designs. These are all made in Italy. So I thought I'd ask him what it's like to be in the Rialto these days. Allora, com'è il Rialto in questi giorni?
Rialto in questi giorni è stracarico di turismo, ci sono tantissimi turisti, però la qualità dei turisti che abbiamo non è poi così eccellente. Abbiamo numeri importanti perché la città è invasa da persone da tutte le parti del mondo, ma in questo momento, fra le guerre, i problemi che ci sono economici di varie nazioni, dobbiamo contentarci di quello che, come si dice a Venezia, passa il convento.
Cioè?
Cioè, quello che arriva bisogna prendere.
All right, so this is the time of great over-tourism in Venice. Actually, this is where people come from all over the world. But and what he was saying, this is something what I remember when I was growing up in Venice. The people who used to come here and used to come to the Rialto were very different kind of tourists. They were tourists who actually spent money. Whereas these days, the tourists who are coming are looking for cheap things, tat, and often the people who are selling them actually have nothing to do with Venice at all, and a lot of the goods are made in China. This is why when you come to Venice, it's important to find Stefano and to actually look at things which are really proper Pacca Venetian. The other thing he said is that actually there's a bit of uncertainty now because of all of the problems in the world, and there's a great line he said in Venetian, which is you just have to make do. Stefano, but it's really nice to see you again. Really, honestly, it's really nice to know that Venice is continuing.
Ciao.
Venice, continua, e ti vedo presto.
La prossima settimana. Grazie.
Ciao. This is where Stefano's parents used to sell fruit and veg. And as you can see all around here today, actually there's no fruit and veg here at all. What they're selling is just a lot of mementos and souvenirs of Venice. And in fact, a lot of the people who are selling them, the vast majority are not Venetian at all, which is okay, which is actually what Venice has been in its whole history, is bringing in people from afar. I think it's great that Stefano's continuing that tradition of his parents and selling things here. But Venice has reinvented itself now, right? So it's as they still sell fruit and veg, but they really sell much more things like this to to the tourists who are here. So if you follow me here this way, I thought I'd show you where the fruit is. Today it's totally empty, but on every other day of the week you would find people. It's empty today because it's a holiday. But if we go in and try to imagine what it would have been like at one time, with people buying fruit and veg, some of it grown in Venice itself. But as we go further in, what you need to be imagining is other things being sold, which are much more precious, and that is spices. Spice became the spice of life, if you like. That was a bit of a dad joke, wasn't it? Of Venice. It was what they were famous for. It's what they made a lot of money out of. And they really prided themselves, the Venetian, in their ability to get spices from all over the world. What we'll find is that Venice really made a name for itself because they had such great contacts with the Byzantine Empire. And here's where they sold them. Today, the spices that you get are the spices you might get in any market in Italy. These are just cute little salts or rices or things that you put in to make a nice spaghettata, a nice little pasta. But in those days, they'd be selling things like ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon, peppers of all kinds. And what I really love about the Venetians is they weren't like the Florentines. They really showed off their wealth. And you can tell that by their recipes. And one of the recipes, which I think must have tasted awful, but says everything about Venice that you need to know, it was a recipe for ginger chicken. And I mean ginger chicken rather than chicken with ginger, because actually the recipe called for half a kilo of ginger to go with chicken. But that's their way of showing off. World's changed. If you look here also, these sort of peppers, these peperoncini, which are delightful actually, are Mesoamerican. It's cute today, so it's packaged up in a wonderful little Italian way. But to go back to Venice from where it was, in its heyday, you need to be imagining a whole different variety of spices. Okay, so now we're in the fish markets. We've just right next to where all the fruit and veg is sold and where the spices were sold time ago. And if you look at the fish market today, it is just actually very pretty, isn't it? This is a 19th century cover, so it's very recent. But the fish market was here long before then. As usually, even today, bustling, and there's always a lingering stench of fish here. The fish is caught in the lagoon still today. Fish is an enormously important part of the Venetian diet. And having come just from the spice market and looking at the fish, when you come here to Venice, what you want to do is to eat the cicchetti. And they're these fantastic little snacks, cicchetti, always with a little bread or polenta on top. And one of the key recipes is sarde in saur, little anchovies. You can imagine them being sold here. This is the remainders of the fish market. As you can see, it's actually blissfully pretty today. The only people you see are tourists, and the occasional seagull, I think, is waiting for its little fish, which it's not finding. But then after this, the fish market, you come into this square, but then you really need to read the signs. You need to know where to look in Venice. And if you look at the sign there, you can see Campo delle Beccarie. And that means this is the butcher square. So you imagine the smells of the fish, and then you come here to the smells of the butchers. But what you need to do is, so look, when you're in Venice, you look at all those little areas, and if you read this little street, it's called a ruga. A ruga is a wrinkle in Italian, but ruga is also used in Venetian to mean little street, alley. And it's the alley of the spice makers, or the spice sellers, I should say, the spezieri. And if you look over here, you can see the calle. Calle means it's a little bit, it's a street, a little bit bigger, of the butchers and of the bread makers. So this is where you bought your bread originally. And today, when when you think about the butchers and the bread and the fish, you'd be transported maybe back into the 19th century, 20th century, where everybody did their everyday shopping. But actually, what you need to be imagining is all of the people in the heyday of Venice making things, selling things, and the languages you're hearing today, German today, right? The languages you would have heard then too. Many Germans, 5,000 Germans lived here in the 16th century, 5,000 Greeks lived here, many Albanians, many Slavs, many Jews, 3,000 Jews, all in a population of 100,000. 20% were foreign. So a bit like Venice today, actually. So it's interesting. Alive, well, very cosmopolitan, and the center point of the whole of the Mediterranean, where goods are coming from the north, the east, from the south. So it's here, you just have to read it. You just have to know where to look. Of course, when you're here in the Rialto, right by the fish market, what you really want to do is also look at some of the amazing palazzi that are on this Grand Canal. Can you imagine all of the many people, the families of the Golden Book? These are the creme de la creme of Venice, all vying with one another to have the most fantastic palazzo. So there, and with those immensely ornate merlons, is the Cadoro, right opposite us here. And with this just immaculate tracery, this is Venetian Gothic at its height. It's called the Cadoro because the Contarini family, one of the great and the good, actually had gold leaf on the outside of their palazzo, just in case people didn't know they were loaded. Today, it's an amazing sort of gallery. The Franchetti Gallery is bought by Giorgio Franchetti. And it's lovely, and you go in, and you can, for 5 minutes, imagine yourself in a Venetian elite. So all of the palazzi on the Grand Canal, you know, which vary in style here from the Venetian Gothic to the neoclassical, the one maybe that stands out for its history the most is with the white umbrellas in front of it. It's Cadamosto. It's 13th century. It's the oldest of the palazzi on the Grand Canal. And when you look at it closely, this is not Venetian Gothic. This is Byzantine architecture. So you see those columns from which spring those arches. And in between each one, on top of them, you have those wonderful little reliefs. Look up. And what you see is a little bit of a terrace. Do you see that terrace on top? In fact, then all of a sudden you start looking, they all have these terraces. And what's really fun is you need to be imagining the Venetians and their terraces. One of the things they did, particularly in the 18th century, was to dye their hair red. And you know how they dyed their hair red, don't you? It's with ammonia. And you know what the best source of ammonia is. And there they are on their terrazzi, dyeing their hair red with this smelly unction. One of the things you find when you're overlooking the Grand Canal is that you want to cross over. And it's a bit like crossing over a major avenue in a city. Except you can't, right? Because, you know, you can't really swim over, can you? So you can either take a gondola or you can go the cheaper way. And then I to take a traghetto. So this is Traghetto Santa Sofia. And it just is a cheap way to get across. It's just a little kind of a gondola-like boat without the fancinesses, without the fancy ferro, you know, that thing which marks a gondola. And it just takes you across. A traghetto. Okay, well, we've gotten off the boat from the Rialto and walked over here, and the sun's come out. So we're here on our way to the ghetto. This is the Jewish ghetto, of course, and here you can see the sign for it. So it's written not only in Italian, but then you can see the Hebrew on top there. So we're going to go to this historic ghetto. We're going to explore it as all part of trying to understand who these people of Venice are. So come with me over here. We're going to walk towards the ghetto. So here we are. This is the spillage of the Venetian Ghetto, if you like. This is the outer reaches when they ran out of room in the ghetto. What you're left with is those kind of sounds from the past that you can imagine people, what their life would have been like in this area when they're all closed in here. So you hear the sounds of the, domestic life. You can still see people hanging out, some laundry. This is part of Venice I call Laundry Venice. There's some parts of Venice where people still hang up their laundry, which is not like St. Mark's in Rialto. That's not Laundry Venice. So we're going to cross over here and talk about people who lived here, the people who are enclosed here. And you can even see their lives from here, just written out in the architecture. Count the number of stories, and you realize they've run out of room. They've run out of room, haven't they? They had to pile them up high because the Jews had to live here. So they made the distance between the floors all different because what can you do? So the ghetto is on an island. This is the old ghetto, which is, of course, ironically called the new ghetto. So the question is, why here? Why do they put them here, quite apart from the fact it's an island? And why is it called a ghetto? Well, it was a foundry before then. This is a really smelly industry. We're in a part of Venice called Cannareggio. This is where the industry is. This is like the industrial hub, one of them, of Venice. And in this smelly area, the foundries went, and there are a couple of brothers called the Brolo brothers who bought up this land and literally wanted to have a real estate plan. And they wanted to build up these high rises to sell to people. And it didn't work. But what ended up happening is in 1516, they decided that the Jews needed to be enclosed in their own little space. So they used the old ghetto, which is the foundry, to put the Jews in here. So we're going to cross the bridge and hear about the remarkable and tragic story. So here we're in the Ghetto Novo, which is, of course, the old ghetto, ironically. This is the hub. There were 2,500 to 3,000 Jews who lived in this neighborhood. All around here, this is their main campo, if you like, here. So if you look at some of the buildings more closely, they tell you their story. Here, do you see those 5 tall windows there? That's the Italian synagogue of old. It's not open to the public at all, and it's not used today. So that's the Italian one. And if you come this way, you can see one of the things you want to get an impression of is just how many people are, used to live here. Here it is. Again, it's these 5 tall windows. And there you can see the Hebrew written on top. These are for the Ashkenazim. These are the German Jewry who lived here. They were kicked out in the 15th century. Most of them, of course, went to Eastern Europe, but a good number came here. So we have the Ashkenazim, and then you have the Italian, and just around the corner, you have a synagogue, which is actually stunning inside. And there it is with that wooden facade there. It's a synagogue called the Canton. And if we just look at those three synagogues and draw the inferences from them, what you get is you have the notion that they're allowed to practice their religion, which is really important. Actually, this is something that was guaranteed by the Vatican itself. You know, it was illegal to stop them from practicing their religion. And yet, of course, they're not going to display it too overtly here. And so that whole idea of a neighborhood is not new to the ghetto. What is new is the whole idea of being enclosed. So the Germans who lived in the Fondaco dei Tedeschi were locked in at night, but there were a lot of Germans who didn't live there. But here in Venice, from 1516 onward, if you were Jewish, you had to live here. And if you were Jewish, not only did you have to live here, but when you left during the day, you had to wear a yellow O. But the whole idea of you having to be recognized when you go out there. People have to know if you're Jewish or not. That is unusual. That is restricted to the Jews. The other thing is it's the fact that it's closed off. They're chained up here at night. The sense of claustrophobia you have. Yes, community, but claustrophobia, that's unique to this population. So we're going to go over here. We're going to look at the sorts of jobs that the Venetians allowed the Jews to do. One of the key things they did was to sell used clothes. So they're allowed to do that. And they were also allowed, strangely enough, to become doctors. And they went to the University of Padua, which is the university, the second oldest university in Italy. And so they became doctors and they practiced their profession here. You look around the corner here, and again, I think this is something that people just walk past and don't necessarily know what they're looking at. You can see the words Banco Rosso, which means red bench, really, bench. And this is where we get the word bank from. Bank, like our bank, we're lending institutions, because actually these were lending institutions, and they were all done by colors. There was a green, there's a red, and there's a black. And you went by your colors so that you know who lent you the money. And the guy would be, the moneylender would be here, lending it. We're talking about personal finances. Finance is done on a usury level. And this is something the Jews, of course, could do and Christians not. Usury being considered sinful. And you can see the remnants here. They left us for the Jewish population to do. If you cross that bridge in your own mind's eye, you get to a part of Cannareggia, which is not the ghetto there. So it is, again, it's just an enclosed area. And today, this is the oldest ghetto in the world. This is not something to be proud of. Venetians aren't proud of the fact that they came up with this concept and came up with this word. But soon thereafter, you had ghettos all over Italy.